Hey, LA Progressive friends and family. This is Sharon Kyle here, publisher of the LA Progressive, and I'm joined by Marcy Winograd. Now, Marcy wrote a piece and contributed to the LA Progressive a couple of hours ago, and thank you so much, Marcy.
Of course,
And
thank you.
and it's a piece about a piece of legislation in the California legislation that was amended after Marcy had written the piece. And Marcy called me and said, "Hey, it's amended." And so I said, "Marcy, let's talk about this online." So go ahead, Marcy, tell us what is the bill. Oh, and tell us who you are. Introduce yourself.
I can do that. Well, first of all, I just really want to thank you and Dick and LA Progressive for hosting me. It's wonderful to be with you. And I so appreciate your many contributions to offering an alternative viewpoint on LA Progressive. We're just not going to read these articles in corporate press. So thank you for that. In terms of my background, I am a volunteer organizer with Code Pink on the Central Coast. I'm also a member of the legislative team for Jewish Voice for Peace in Jewish Voice for Peace Action. That's the sister organization, the political wing or arm of Jewish Voice for Peace in California. And in addition to that, I'm a retired English and government teacher. I'm a voting member of the UTLA House of Representatives and deeply involved in the anti-war movement and the social justice movement. So that's a bit about me. And then, I just want to say that I co-authored that piece that I sent earlier, and that has been published in antiwar.com and on the Code Pink blog and a few other places with Rick Sterling. However, since then, I mean, just in the last few hours, as you mentioned, the bill has been dramatically amended. And I have to be honest, I was getting sick to my stomach reading this amended bill. It's AB 715, and everybody in California needs to know what's happening here because this bill is a page out of Trump's playbook. I don't even think the Trump administration would come up or has come up with something so onerous as this bill, AB 715, which is co-authored by Rick Chavez Burr, who represents the area in Los Angeles from Santa Monica to Hollywood, as well as Dawn Addis. She's an assembly member in Morro Bay in San Luis Obispo County, as well as two members, the co-chairs of the Legislative Jewish Caucus. That's about 19 members. These two chairs, Jesse Gabriel, represents Encino, the San Fernando Valley, Scott Wiener, the San Francisco area. The two also happen to chair the budget committees in the respective state houses in the Assembly and the state Senate. So that gives them a lot of influence. And others have signed on as co-authors, and we're going to be having some very heart-to-heart discussions with them about this. And those are the chairs of what they call the diversity caucuses, the Latino caucus, the Black caucus, and the AAPI caucus. And we'll circle back to that and why they might have signed on to this, what now is just an explicitly racist bill. So if it's okay with you, I'll explain what's wrong with it.
Exactly. But before you explain what's wrong with it, before it was amended, I mean, there was an original intent why this bill was written in the first place. And so let's talk about what originally you thought the bill was going to be about, and then let's talk about now what the amendment has converted it into.
Sure. Well, to give context to this bill, what happened was the Legislative Jewish Caucus, which I call the Legislative Israel Caucus. Those are most of the people in that caucus, if not all, want to shield Israel from criticism. Their agenda is two-pronged: to expand Holocaust education throughout California, to deflect, to normalize the genocide in Gaza, to paint Jews as forever victims, as opposed to having been persecuted as specific times in history. They, in addition to wanting to expand Holocaust education and bring in the Anti-Defamation League in a big way, and we have to remember that the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, is the target of a national boycott. The head of it, the executive director, excused Musk's Nazi salute, has defended Trump's abduction of Mahmoud Khalil, the Palestinian activist at Columbia who was detained. And so we don't consider the ADL a good partner for Jews, for anyone really. And in addition to wanting to expand Holocaust education, the Legislative Jewish Caucus, chaired by Gabriel and Weiner, also want to silence any criticism of Israel in California schools. They will deny that probably, but that's my perception, certainly after reading this bill and being familiar with other legislation that they have pushed. So what they did was they first introduced a bill, AB 1468, which was about ethnic studies. It was to dumb down ethnic studies. And it said, ethnic studies should not talk about what's going on internationally. Like there's no relationship between what's going on in that, in the world and what's going on here. It should only focus on domestic issues. It said that there should be uniform standards, despite the fact that ethnic studies is taught in a variety of disciplines. And anyway, the bill was problematic. California Teachers Association, which represents about 30,000 teachers in California, I'm a member, opposed the bill. And eventually the co-authors hurled it into the trash, okay? They abandoned that bill because it was going nowhere. Next, they introduced an even worse bill, and that is AB 715. So initially, when they introduced this bill, it was skeletal. There were clauses that were problematic that would have gone into effect immediately, but most of it was under intent. So we intend in future legislation, we want lawmakers to sign on to this pledge that they will support this in future legislation. Well, now it has been amended after having passed the Assembly overwhelmingly. Now it's in the Senate, and it soon will go on July 9th, Wednesday, July 9th, to the Senate Education Committee, and on Tuesday, July 15th, to the State Senate Judiciary Committee. And I think it will probably be ripped apart in the Judiciary Committee because, on the face of it, this AB 715 strikes me as unconstitutional. I'm not a lawyer, but I am aware of the First Amendment. So if I may, I'll explain what this bill says.
Please do.
All right. AB 715 redefines nationality to include a number of things, but one of which stands out, and that is a social organization with a collective shared belief.
But I don't understand.
I know. It's like, what are you talking about here? Okay, so California Education Code 220 prohibits discrimination on the basis of nationality, religion, gender, and so forth. Nationality is not defined as being in a shared organization, in an organization with a shared identity. What they are getting at is they don't want anyone to criticize the joining or the support for an organization that supports Israel's genocide or supports Israel's apartheid or supports Israel's occupation and home demolitions in occupied Palestinian territory. And there are a number of organizations like that. So that's why they're including that. It's really to equate nationality with Israel. Nationality in this country with Israel. It's to conflate it. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, it also centers Israel in examples of anti-Semitism. It says, we prohibit anti-Semitism in California schools. We will not allow school boards, administrators, school districts. We will not allow them to use in any sense, in any way, to have their teachers anywhere in their district. Think about this. LAUSD has 550,000 students. It stretches from one end of the county to another. We will not allow the introduction of any curriculum that could be the basis of an unlawful discrimination lawsuit. What is that? Especially when you consider that they are redefining anti-Semitism to center Israel. So this really straitjackets teachers, it straitjackets school board members and administrators to the point where I was a teacher for 25 years. I can see if this passes, administrators just walking the halls, they'll be freaking out. They'll be micromanaging every classroom, every article, every song, every map that's introduced in a classroom, because who wants to be the target of a complaint before the California Department of Education or the Federal Department of education under Article 6 of the Civil Rights Act. Now,
Well, it sounds like it really chills the freedom of speech.
I think, the Senate Judiciary Committee, the State Senate Judiciary Committee, which is chaired by Unger, if they are serious, if they have any ethical responsibility to their profession, to the people of California, they will rip this bill apart because it violates the First Amendment everywhere. I'll tell you some of the definite examples that they give of anti-Semitism, which really they want to enshrine in California education. That is if you say that Israelis can be equated with Nazis. Well, when you see IDF soldiers shooting people, Palestinians in Gaza lining up for flour, starving Palestinians because of Israel's blockade, and they're shooting them like fish in a barrel, you might make that analogy. And you know what? You should be able to. It's free speech.
So let me understand this. Irrespective of the behavior that you're witnessing and that you're describing as or likening it to Nazi behavior. So it doesn't have, there is no association or connection to what the people are doing that are being described as Nazi-like behavior. It's not the behavior itself. It is a person that's sort of cocooned in this protection where no one is able to say anything against an Israeli who might be killing a Palestinian. You're not supposed to.
An unarmed Palestinian families. What they're doing here, the Legislative Jewish Caucus and AB 715, and I ask everybody who's listening to be immediately contact your state representatives, not federal, we're talking about states, so the Assembly and the State Senate, and say, come out publicly against AB 715. Because in addition to saying you will be accused of anti-Semitism if you equate Israelis with Nazis, you will also be accused of anti-Semitism if you criticize Israel as a settler colonial state, or even introduce an article, two competing articles, one that says it is and one that says it isn't. They don't want that. They want to prohibit that in the classroom. If there's any course instruction that does not respect the significance of Israel to the Jewish people, that will be considered anti-Semitic. And it goes on and on. Sharon, I consider this bill anti-Semitic. As a Jewish person, I do not want to be stereotyped. I don't want to have anything to do with Israel and its sociopathic behavior in Gaza and its long-standing oppression and erasure of Palestinians. Don't say that you're doing that for me, right? This is about empire. This is about a state that is a proxy for the United States, but maybe a rogue proxy. So it's not really clear, if the tail is wagging the dog at this point. And as this bill does, to suggest that all Jews have an affinity for the state of Israel, that is anti-Semitic and that is racist. Racist. We are not a monolith. We don't all think alike. And frankly, my safety as a Jewish woman is in speaking out against the policies and practices of Israel, not just Netanyahu. I have friends who will say, if we could just get rid of Netanyahu. No, it's not just Netanyahu, right? We've been witnessing ethnic cleansing in the state of Israel before its inception in 1947, when, 1947, 48, 500 Palestinian villages were destroyed, some burned to the ground, 750,000 Palestinians fled in horror and were never allowed to return. So all of that, the Legislative Jewish Caucus, Rick Chavez Berber, Don Addis, Jesse Gabriel, Scott Wiener, they don't want any discussion of that in California schools. And what is so offensive is that at the same time that they are silencing the education of our students about an unfolding genocide, they are also demanding the expansion of Holocaust and genocide education. What good is that if we cannot teach or even discuss the current genocide?
So ironic, it's like what's happening across the rest of the country, and I'm sure included in California with DEI and critical race theory. So they are really trying to control what is taught in our public schools across the nation. And AB 715 is specific to California, but it wouldn't surprise me if there wasn't similar legislation in other states.
Oh, absolutely. The Israel lobby in California, like the Israel lobby across the country, works in concert with others, right? Not in isolation. And their efforts to expand Holocaust education, to paint Jews as forever victims, and to justify and excuse and rationalize the most heinous actions, that is an agenda that is proliferating across the country, and they even have maps of where Holocaust education is mandated by law and where it is recommended and so forth. In addition, this bill, AB 715, says that you as an educator are anti-Semitic if you introduce material or deny the right of Israel to exist. Now, I'm reminded of Zoran Mandani, the fantastic mayoral candidate in New York City, who was asked if he supported Israel's right to exist, and he said yes, as a state of equals. And I think that's the point. Perhaps they forgot to put that in there, that they want to go after those who say Israel cannot exist as a Jewish state, as a state that privileges one ethnicity over another. But they say, you can't deny Israel's right to exist. I guess implicit in that is as a Jewish state. Beyond these definitions, which are very similar, if not the same, as examples in the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance Act, this is called the IRA. Beyond that, they also are encouraging defamatory behavior on the part of the state superintendent and local education agencies. And I'll get to that in a minute. But just backing up on the IRA, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but 35 countries got together and they had a meeting and they came up with this definition of anti-Semitism. The definition itself is not a problem. I think it's like hatred, bigotry, persecution of Jews, but then there are guiding examples. And I don't know, I've heard that the guy who came up with these examples never intended them to be legislated, but that's what we're seeing. The codification, the legislation of these examples that center Israel in examples of anti-Semitism. You can't deny its right to exist. You can't equate Israelis with Nazis. You can't talk about Israel as a settler colonial state, and on and on. So the IRA, fortunately, it was killed in Congress by Bernie Sanders and Rand Paul. They gutted the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, which would have codified these examples for the Federal Department of Education to define anti-Semitism, but they were able to gut that bill. So thank you, Bernie. Thank you, Rand Paul, for that. Okay, back to AB 715. What else does it do? This bill says, as I mentioned before, school districts, school boards, local education agencies, they're called county offices of education. There are 58 across the state. They are not allowed to, they cannot allow the use of anything that might contradict those examples or be considered anti-Semitic based on those examples. And they're also going after professional developers, teacher trainers. Here's why. Okay, so going back to ethnic studies, when it was adopted by the state and it was mandated to become a graduation requirement by 2030 and to be offered as an optional course in high schools by the end of this year, provided there was funding for it, there were educators who met over a long period of time to come up with a model curriculum. And it includes lessons and includes guiding principles, among them being focusing on decolonization, on racism, on solidarity movements, on community efficacy, those sorts of things. Now, there were members of the group who felt that those were, those were okay, but we needed to go further. And we needed to have lessons that really delved into the colonization of different ethnic groups. So they came up with the Liberated Ethnic Studies model curriculum. And already the Zionists have filed lawsuits against them, but they have lost in court. They filed a lawsuit charging them with being anti-Semitic, but they lost in court. And I'm proud to say that my husband, Ira Gottlieb, represented UTLA in that action. All right. So they haven't gotten anywhere in court yet. That's why they're trying to legislate all of this. And in addition to the examples of anti-Semitism, to codifying those examples and disallowing the use of anything based that might violate those examples, they also have sections of this bill that encourage anyone who feels offended by what's taught in class to file a complaint with the Department of Education, and that school districts are mandated to advise these plaintiffs or those making the complaints that they can get restraining orders against teachers. Yeah, that's in the bill. It says that the superintendent and school districts shall be advised by the, so parents or anyone who files these complaints shall be advised by the educational institution of their civil law remedies, including injunctions, restraining orders available to them. What? Can you believe this? In addition, what else 715 says? AB 715. Oh, that we should have an anti-Semitism coordinator for the state to police all the classrooms to make sure that no one criticizes Zionism or Israel. Wow, right? This anti-Semitism coordinator will be under the auspices of the State Department of Education, the state school superintendent. And at this point, I'll mention that, we have a number of people who are running, one of whom is Al Mortsuchi. He represents Torrance, and he seems to be like totally in the pocket of the Israel lobby, of the censorship lobby. When he ran the Assembly Education Committee hearing on this bill. I was outraged. Sharon, I was outraged watching Al Martsucci conduct this hearing. There were about 70 supporters of AB 715 who got up and complained about anti-Semitism, not really giving anything specific. And he let them go on and talk. And then there were almost twice as many. I think there were about 140 opponents, many of them from Jewish Voice for Peace. I'm a member of Jewish Voice for Peace. It's an anti-Zionist organization. Jewish Voice for Peace Action, who spoke against, and when they got up, he cut them off almost immediately. We got it. Next. We got it. Next. We got it.
Oh, I didn't know this about Al Mortsuchi.
Yeah. So I am not endorsing him for state school superintendent, and I would urge everyone to look beyond his candidacy to see who else, because there are others running. If he gets elected, I mean, it's Trump in the classroom. It is.
So what do you think is the end game of those that are pushing this amendment for AB 715? I'm wondering if the supporters or those behind it are actually the Christian Zionists. Does that discussion come up?
No, I don't think they are. The Christians, certainly the Christian Zionists are very strong. They're Trump's base. There are maybe 30 million in the United States, 10 million in Christians United for Israel, Kufi, and I think they're having their summit right now. And they're a scary bunch because, talk about anti-Semitism, they want Israel for the Jews because they think that if the Jews claim Israel, that's a precondition for the return of Christ in the rapture. If Armageddon, they're going to hell.
Yeah.
But let me just add one other thought about this anti-Semitism coordinator. That person would also be in charge of teacher training, of pushing out the Anti-Defamation League, which also equates criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism and comes up with all sorts of inflated statistics to justify all of this. I did the article that I sent you, I interviewed some Jewish parents about this idea of an anti-Semitism coordinator. And they thought this was a terrible idea because It separates Jews. It isolates Jews. We are living in fascist times. We're watching masked men abduct immigrants off the streets, send them to these concentration camps. We need to be a united front.
Right.
Instead, what they want to do, this legislative Jewish caucus, they want to exceptionalize what they consider Jewish safety and divide what should be a united front.
Mhm.
You know, so it's a terrible idea. It's very dangerous. And lastly, you know, well, there's more to say about this bill, but I see that they want to start indoctrinating students in kindergarten. They want strategies implemented to combat anti-Semitism, serving pupils in transitional, oh, not even kindergarten, transitional kindergarten. I think that's pre-K.
Pre-K, pre-K.
Pre-K. So 4-year-olds, right? Oh, and they do say, I think, I don't know if they're trying to cover themselves or what, but they say, you know, it's okay if a student wants to share an opinion. That's okay, as long as that opinion is not anti-Semitic. As long, based on their definition and examples of anti-Semitism. So they want to censor students and teachers. AB715, and what's really frightening, Sharon, is that the chairs of the Black, Latino, and AAPI caucuses signed on as co-authors. And that gives legitimacy to this racist, deeply racist bill, because why should Jews, Zionist Jews, have an anti-Semitism coordinator when it's Latinos who are being targeted right now, kidnapped, harassed by ICE? And
so do you have a sense, do you have a sense at all as to why
oh, yes,
the AAPI and the Black
yes.
Caucus, and so can you give us a sense why they're doing
Sure.
this?
This isn't written down anywhere, Sharon, but this is what we have gathered from conversations. I'm part of a coalition. It's called the California Palestine Solidarity Coalition. Statewide, the major organizations that participate are Jewish Voice for Peace Action, CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, AROC, Arab Resource Organizing Center, and Liberated Ethnic Studies Model Curriculum. So those are the main organizations, but there are lots of people and teachers up and down the state. You know, I'm in contact with a lot of them who are approaching their legislators and saying, please, we want you to oppose this bill. Okay, so why did these diversity caucus chairs sign on? Well, they want ethnic studies funded. It is still unfunded in California. It's supposed to be offered optionally in high schools by the end of this year, a graduation requirement by 2030. It's unfunded. Gavin Newsom has not funded it, and the chairs of the Legislative Jewish Caucus, which have introduced this AB 715, have not called for it to be funded, have not written it into their budget. They say they support it, provided blah, blah, blah. So we can only surmise that the chair signed on to this in hopes of securing funding for ethnic studies, but hey, they haven't been able to. And instead, what we have is just a MAGA bill in California.
That's right. That's right. And I think that you're right in characterizing it a MAGA bill. I doubt that it is coincidental that this bill is coming before the California legislative body at the same time within the first 200 days of the Trump administration. You know, that he's setting a tone that is giving license to people who have been wanting to do this, or maybe the ADL has been waiting for an opportunity to do this. But I think that you're absolutely right in calling it a MAGA bill, and that's how we have to call it out for what it is, and encourage people in California to contact their legislators. So where does this bill stand, in the process?
Sure. So it passed these assembly committees. It passed on the floor of the assembly. There were, I think, about 11 or 12 who did not vote for it. They did not vote against it. They just didn't vote, which is, I guess, a safe way of voting against it. Now it's in the state Senate, and it goes before, typically bills will go before a policy committee before it will hit the floor, before the bills will hit the floor. So this bill goes to the Senate Education Committee, which is chaired by Sasha Perez in San Gabriel Valley. And then it will go to the Senate Judiciary Committee, chaired by Tom Unger. So it's really imperative that we contact those committee members, but also contact all of our representatives, because eventually this will come before them unless we're able, hopefully, to defeat it. We are urging the California Teachers Association to come out against it. Initially, the CTA was reticent. They said they were leaning against it, but they weren't going to take a position on a bill that was mostly intent. Well, it's not mostly intent now. There's nothing, there's no intent in here. This is happening, right? So there will be a letter writing campaign. If you're a teacher and you're a member of CTA, I urge you to contact the board, the officers, and say you expect them to fight vigorously against this bill. It will be intolerable for teachers if this passes.
Well,
and
I know for
battle
sure
the
that
state all sorts of lawsuits, First Amendment lawsuits. And one
absolutely.
other thing I forgot to mention in this bill, it also says that if the state superintendent or a local education agency, county office of education, deems that a teacher trainer, like the liberated ethnic studies model curriculum people, if it deems that they have violated or have taught anything that's discriminatory based on their examples of anti-Semitism, that the education agency then needs to notify everybody, notify all other districts that these teacher trainers are not to be used. I mean, this is defamatory.
Right, it is. And one thing that we haven't gotten into that I was thinking about is what about all the educational materials that they might find that are currently being used that as a result of AB 715, if it's passed, some of those educational materials, no doubt, will be found to be anti-Semitic in one way or another. And wouldn't that necessitate getting new materials? And who would provide those materials?
Well, I'm sure there's some money to be made here, right? Just follow the money. Sharon, we have standards in education. They're goals, objectives for teaching and learning. And in the 10th grade, one of the standards is that students will discuss the ramifications of the establishment of the state of Israel. Good luck teaching that under 715, right?
Wow.
So in short, we've got to get on the phone. We've got to contact our state lawmakers and say no on AB 715.
Cool. Well, in your piece, I don't know if you've put links, but I'll put links in if they aren't there to the California legislators through up and down the state of California, not just in Southern California. Isn't that correct?
Yes. Yeah, this bill is statewide, and the people pushing it are affiliated with the Legislative Jewish Caucus, which many years ago pushed through a very watered down version because of all the activism in opposition to a bill to prohibit state contractors from boycotting Israel.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
Oh, it's a
in LA. In LA, there are a number of members of the Legislative Jewish Caucus, among them the Rubio sisters. Also, Ben Allen, he's a member. I can't remember all of them offhand, but people can look it up. Legislative Jewish Caucus.
Yeah, and I can put a link. I'm sure the Legislative Jewish Caucus has its own section.
Oh yeah. In fact, they used to fly. About 10 years ago, they used to fly an Israeli flag on their state flag. I complained about it, and they took it down.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Marcy, thank you so much for your activism, for the work that you continue to do. Marcy Winograd is a frequent contributor to the LA Progressive. And by the way, if you're listening to this and you appreciate this conversation and the other conversations that we have here, we encourage you to please like, please share, please subscribe. At a time when things are worse than I've ever remembered them being, we need you more than ever. We're not even asking you for money. Just click that you like, give us a thumbs up in whatever ways, whatever social media platform. We put these videos on every social media platform that there is, as well as embed them in our articles. So Marcy Winograd, is there anything you want to say as we close?
No, just, if people want to know more, they can contact me directly, Marcy, Marcy @codepink.org. We also have a campaign at Code Pink, Drop the ADL, and that's part of a national campaign. There are 90 organizations that have joined that campaign, and we have testified before school boards up and down the Central Coast and also before the Los Angeles Unified School Board to say, do not introduce any curriculum from the Anti-Defamation League into our classrooms, because they're doing what this bill is doing. They're equating criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism and indoctrinating our students. We don't want that.
That's right. That's right. Well, thank you, Marcy. And also thank you, Code Pink, for doing what you do. We all have to link arms and work together to defeat this fascism as we're watching it right before our very eyes continue to grow in our country.
That's
well,
right.
this is Sharon Kyle. Thank you, Marcy, for
All right,
joining.
thank you.
And we're going to wrap it up for tonight. But
Okay.
this article will be going out first thing in the morning. Well, this video.
Okay. Sounds good.
Thank you. Okay. Good night. Thank you for sticking around. If you like the LA Progressive content and the discussions we have here, please consider clicking the subscribe button below and also give us a thumbs up. That helps to grow our audience by feeding the algorithm, which helps to get this content in front of more eyes. Thanks for stopping by. We really appreciate your support.